This is Jim Williams with the Hurricane City Tropical Update for September 1st, 7:30 p.m. Here's a close-up floater loop of Hurricane Earl east of the northern Bahamas, and boy, this system is really intense and it's very well organized considering the shear and dry air that it's been dealing with. But I think the reason this system is fighting it off is I think that we now have what could be considered an annular hurricane, meaning there's a very large eye forming in the direct center of the CDO, which is the hurricane force wind field. And whenever you have a system like that, it fights off wind shear and dry air very good. And this system should maintain major hurricane strength as it passes near the Outer Banks of North Carolina. What you also notice in this shot is the banding is pretty pronounced due north, and that's generally an indication that it's about ready to go that direction. That's usually, you just follow those feeder bands, and that tells you pretty much where the system is headed. So we have an annular hurricane fighting off wind shear right now, and this system is very well organized. All right, let's go to our watch graphic here from the HurTrack program, and you can see that we have hurricane warnings out for the Outer Banks of North Carolina. I'll get to the details on the Outer Banks and what they can expect here as this system comes very near there. And we have hurricane watches from Norfolk all the way up to New Jersey, and down here just south of the Outer Banks, but I don't believe that is going to have any impact down there. I think the most of the impact is going to be in the Outer Banks and up here in Cape Cod and surrounding areas where there's a hurricane watch out, and the rest of the areas have tropical storm watches out for the Long Island and surrounding areas. I'll get to the details on what to expect in these areas in just a minute. But residents in the Outer Banks should be prepared for significant gusts to hurricane force, and maybe even more than that depending on the forecast track. Alright, here are the model runs from today, and you can see that they're pretty tightly clustered right off the coast of the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Even the No Gaps is joined in with the pack here, keeping it just offshore, but I'll tell you what, if it goes right over the Outer Banks, you're going to get some very heavy damage, and it's going to be a very close call. This is why there's a hurricane warning, and they're urging people to get out of the area, because this could be a very bad situation if the eye passes anywhere near the Outer Banks of North Carolina. We just want to hope it stays on its forecast track, which would take it about 80 or 90 miles an hour east of the Outer Banks of North Carolina. So what would happen? Well, first of all, here's yesterday's graphic I showed you showing the hurricane force wind field staying offshore the Outer Banks of North Carolina out in here. And over here would be sustained tropical storm force winds encroaching on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and out in here would be gusts of tropical storm force, which would include the Norfolk area to the north, and down here near Morehead City would have gusts of tropical storm, but the sustained winds would be basically offshore. Well, that's changed a little today because they're expecting it to get a little bit closer, and they're expecting it now to get within 41 nautical miles east of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. And there's some interesting comparisons between this track and Hurricane Emily back in 1993. I'm going to show you a close-up of that in just a minute. But here is the forecast for 2 a.m. on Friday morning. So this will be happening in the dark, which makes it even worse because you don't know what's happening outside. But based on this, most of the hurricane force, of course this would be a Category 3 at the time, and most of the hurricane force winds would remain offshore, but they would be just touching Cape Hatteras, North Carolina out here. And depending on how strong this is going to depend on how much wind they're going to get on the coast. But we're talking 75 to 90 mile an hour gust right in the Cape Hatteras, the town of Cape Hatteras. But elsewhere on the east coast of North Carolina, sustained tropical storm force winds, and inside the yellow circle are gusts of tropical storm force, or gust, not sustained, but gusty winds all the way up to probably 40, 50 miles an hour, including Norfolk and down toward Morehead City, North Carolina. So that's the current situation. Now, let's take a look at the Hurricane Hunter fixes out here and get an idea of what you would expect based on that forecast track. Now, we've gone out about 90 miles, 80 or 90 miles to the west of the center of circulation. So this is even under the general track of the National Hurricane Center's thinking, maybe a little bit higher gust. Let's just take a look at this area right here. These wind barbs right here would be the Outer Banks of North Carolina. If it were to maintain this current strength, if these were the Outer Banks right here, here's what they would be getting. We have let's see, 40 knots, 55 knots, 73 knot wind barb right there. And this is would be on the northwest quad, 62 knots. Then we go to the southwest quad, and winds are significantly less, about 50 to 60 miles an hour. Now, if it were to pass to the left of the Outer Banks, this is the kind of winds they'd be getting over here on the right side of this hurricane. Look at this, 88 miles an hour. There's 92 miles an hour, 105. There's 115. There's 130 miles an hour due east of the center of circulation. And you go on and on. We have, it's sporadic over here, but basically major hurricane force winds on the right quad of this. And then on the southeast quad, we're talking 65, 75 miles an hour, about 75 to 90 miles an hour. But the highest winds are always on the right front quad right here, and that's going to stay offshore the Outer Banks of North Carolina. So the good news is if it maintains its course as expected, they'll get gusts around 90 miles an hour on the Outer Banks. So let's hope it passes a little bit further to the east of the official forecast from the National Hurricane Center. That's why those people need to be prepared for some high winds up there in the Outer Banks. Now, what about the Martha's Vineyard and Cape Cod and areas like that? This was yesterday's map. Hurricane force winds stay offshore. Tropical storm force sustained winds hit Nantucket Island, Martha's Vineyard, out near the edges of Cape Cod, and gusts of tropical storm force all out in here near Providence and Boston and surrounding areas. Here's today's map. Big difference. Hurricane force winds are approaching Nantucket Island and the very eastern edges of Cape Cod, and then the sustained tropical storm force winds encompass the whole east area of Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard and Boston and all the way down into Massachusetts. Here have gusts 40, 50, 60 miles an hour out of the northeast. Same with Long Island. Nothing's changed out there. Some gusts of tropical storm force, 40, 50, 60 miles an hour as it pulls away, but nothing major expected for Long Island. And here's the final point of impact, and this is Nova Scotia, 85 mile an hour winds, and this is at 10 a.m. on Saturday morning as it'll be flying in here. But notice the wind field shrinks for the hurricane force winds, very small as it's becoming extra tropical, and it expands out for tropical storm force winds, as is typical with extra tropical systems. So most people in Nova Scotia will feel tropical storm force winds, not hurricane force winds. Here's the upper level winds from the University of Wisconsin. You can see right now we have 20 to 30 knots of shear over our system, but because it's an annular system, very well organized, it's able to fight off that wind shear compared to a weaker system like we see with Fiona here that's gotten shredded by the outflow from Hurricane Earl. All right, let me show you something on the HurTrack program I think you're going to find interesting. Let me zoom in on this. And this is the track from 1993. This is Hurricane Emily, the yellow path here you see right off the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And Hurricane Earl is going to take a very similar approach to the Outer Banks before slinging off to the northeast. But back in 1993 when Emily did this, it caused quite a bit of roof damage in the Outer Banks of North Carolina near Cape Hatteras as a 115 mile an hour hurricane. So they can get roof damage on the backside of a major hurricane pulling away. And this hurricane is supposed to come in the same general direction and movement as Hurricane Emily back in 1993. The major hurricane force winds only lasted for a few hours, but it did quite a bit of damage in Cape Hatteras, so that's why they need to be prepared up there. All right, here is the water vapor loop of the Atlantic Basin, and you'll see that we have our scoop coming in from the northwest, and that's going to be the saving grace for the northeastern United States for the most part. And let's take a look quickly here at what's expected as the system. The trough of low pressure is going to. I lost my telestrator here, but the trough of low pressure is right here to the left-hand side of your screen. It's moving in very quickly, and this is going to push Hurricane Earl here more to the north and then northeast, so it's a timing issue. It's about 24 hours away, and we're about 24 hours away from the worst conditions arriving in Cape Hatteras. Actually, not 24, about 36 hours away, so it's going to be a very close call. And we also have, I don't understand what happened to my telestrator here. Oh, here we go. We also have Hurricane, or Tropical Storm Gaston out here. And this system is forecast to become a potential major hurricane right near the northern Leeward Islands. It could come just south or just north of the northern Leeward Islands. So that'll be the thing we'll have to watch for next week, because once Earl gets up here and out of the way, high pressure could build in behind that and steer Gaston off to the west toward the southeastern United States. That's going to be a threat down the road. We're going to have to watch closely. But here comes our scoop over here, and this is going to shove Earl off to the northeast. It's all a timing issue. Visit hurricanecity.com for the latest information on this system. Just to let you know our broadcast plans. Right now we're planning on sporadic coverage from the mid-Atlantic if this becomes a glancing blow like we expect it to be. If the eye is going to come on shore in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, we will go with the full coverage, the Hurricane Warning Show, and it'll be recorded for archive subscribers. That'll happen on Friday morning. Again, this is forecast to happen in the dark, not a good situation. And also, the countdown clock is activated at Hurricane City to tell you when the sustained tropical storm force winds will arrive in the Outer Banks. Well, that's it for now. Thank you again for visiting Hurricane City.